Okay, we move on to the eightfold path. The eightfold path of Buddhism, these are the eight practices that the Buddha is asking his devotees to adopt. The first is right views. That simply says that the Four Noble Truths themselves become the foundation for all that you do. This is a crucial point because it means that from this point forward, as a Buddhist, that you are going to essentially understand life by looking through the lens of the Four Noble Truths. In the same way that Christians oftentimes understand Old Testament scriptures through the lens of Jesus, so also here in Buddhism do we have life being understood and how life should be lived being understood primarily through the lens of the Four Noble Truths. This then becomes your compass, your map, your gyroscope upon which you base everything else. Once you've got that locked down, so to speak, then you can move on to the idea of right intent or right intention. The Buddha was very much one who believed that nirvana could be gained at the end of this life, but it was only going to be done if we are very persistent and single-minded, not being distracted, not being tempted and getting off track, but we're a single-minded focus. Another illustration along this line might be something like that that you see sometimes with small dogs. You might have a situation where you play the rag game with that dog. You'll be tossing it in front of him or her, and they'll grab it and start pulling on it, and they've got one end and you've got the other. So now you've got this game of tug of war going on. And have you ever noticed how when you have a small dog and they are very intent on holding on to their end of the rack, that there are times that you as the master can actually pick the dog up off the floor because they're determined not to let go of that. The Buddha is using the same idea. If you really want nirvana at the end of this life, you can have it. But you're going to have to be as single-mindedly devoted to that idea as the small dog is in holding on to that rag. Thirdly, path number 3, right speech. This really is a call to pay attention to what you say. Listen to what you say, how you say it, the tone of voice that you have when you do say it. But rather than just simply listening to listen to find out what messages you're conveying. Find out where the gaps in your speech are in your life. If you'll pay enough attention, you'll find an opportunity to see those places where, well, what you're saying is not exactly matching up with who you want to be. So it's an idea that as you're careful about what you say, you're not engaging in gossip or slander or lying or those types of things that can bring harm to people. You're very much aware of what you say. Your tongue does not control you. You control your tongue. Path number 4, the idea of right conduct. Here what we're saying is that you pay attention to what you do with your life. You pay attention to your actions. You very intentionally avoid bringing harm to anything that can feel harm, including animals. And in terms of human interactions, you're particularly paying attention to the avoidance of taking what is not offered to you, what does not belong to you, and you're also avoiding any sexual conduct that might bring some harm. Let's take a quick look at an example of this. Here's a scenario. I'm walking across this grass. I have money saved up for my vacation. I've just gotten it from the bank. I'm in a hurry. And I pull my cell phone out of my pocket. And when I do, this money you see pictured here falls in the grass. You're walking behind me. I drop that money and very quickly get in my car, and I'm getting ready to leave. What do you do? Well, most of us, hopefully, would be individuals who would try to stop me and say, hey, sir, you dropped this money. It fell out of your pocket. So in that way, you're not going to just fall into the old finders, keepers, losers, weepers routine. You see somebody who's, in this case me, who's dropped some money, and you do what you consider to be the right thing. You stop me, you say you dropped the money, and all is well. But what about this scenario? I have 3 rooms in my house that look something like this, and I need them all painted by this weekend. My in-laws are coming in, and I need them desperately painted. I will pay you $900 to come in and paint these 3 rooms and get it done as quickly as possible. On the day that you finish, I'm very pleased with the way the rooms look. You've done it on time, under budget, and so forth. And so I reach into my pocket to pull out my checkbook, and I say, oh, rats, I forgot my checkbook. Will you take cash? Well, most of us would say, sure, we'll take cash. But here's the question. If I pay you by check and there's a paper trail, will you report that $900 on line number 21 of the 1040 form in next year's tax return? Or will you come along and will you say, well, it's cash, so no, I'm not going to report it. They're not going to miss it anyway. Now, isn't that interesting? Because when I've asked this question in previous classes, it's not unusual to have students say, well, the government's already got enough money, they're not going to miss it. Well, what if it's the $900 is money that I loaned you, and instead of me paying you $900 for services rendered, what if I loaned you the $900? You said, I'm really desperate. I'll pay you back here just as soon as I get my paycheck here in about another week or so. Can you loan me the $900? Well, when you come along and have that same attitude that you had with the government, oh, that's all right. Mr. Dover is rich. He teaches at Tennessee Wesleyan. He'll have plenty of money. So I'm not going to worry about paying him back. Then it's a different story, isn't it? So this is what the Buddha is really talking about. He's talking about paying attention to your action with the intent of focusing on the motive behind it. So it kind of sums up this way. Watch a person's actions and take your time. It'll reveal everything you need to know. The truth always comes out. The Buddha in some ways is asking the same thing for us in our actions. Take some time. Pay attention to your own actions. And pretty soon you'll see where perhaps there's a double standard or some hypocrisy or some insensitivity. Pay attention to what you're thinking and doing. Path number 5, right livelihood. If you really want to get off of this reincarnation cycle at the end of this life, then how you make your living matters. If you are intent on liberation, if it really matters that you achieve nirvana at the end of this life, then there's little question as to what you should do. You need to go and join a Buddhist brotherhood or monastery, or if you're a female, join become a nun, a Buddhist nun, and you are to work that diligently and to be part of that Buddhist community until you die. And if you are faithful in fulfilling all the responsibilities here, then the hope and promise is that you will achieve nirvana at the end of this life. Unfortunately, for most of us, we have other obligations. And that means that if we cannot or will not choose to enter the monastery, that means that we need to be very carefully choosing those occupations that promote life instead of destroying it. If I offer you a paid salary to be in a vocation that will end up taking life or harming life, even if it's ethical, if it's legal, if there's no law against it, will you take that job, or will you refuse it on the basis that you need to only be occupying your mind and your actions with those things that would promote life instead of destroying it? Path number 6, that idea of with moderation, consistently striving to improve. Okay? The Buddha would have agreed with philosopher William James, who said about the only way he can see to throw off any shackles, any chains that hold us down is not by being the little train that thought it could. I think I can, I think I can, I knew I could, I knew I could. Although that intentionality is exactly what the Buddha is asking for in right intent. Instead, he says it's not going to happen overnight. And in an American society that emphasizes so much the idea that we wanted it yesterday and it's instant, this is probably one of the major reasons that the Buddha teaching and Buddhism, parts of it people really like, the part that it focuses on you and it's very practical. But the idea that you need to be this serious about it, you need to be very persistent, and that true change is going to come in the long haul, that's something that we Americans oftentimes push back against. Path number 7, right mindfulness. Here it's talking about truly understanding what the reality of life is. The Four Noble Truths have provided us with that understanding, and through these practices of meditation and focused awareness, we truly begin to see what life is really about. And what we begin to see and what we begin to understand is that in contrast to the Christian teaching, that the true issue here is separation from God because of sin, the Buddha says something very different. He says, it's not sin. It's not intentional offense against a god or gods. What it really is it's ignorance. We don't know who we are. We don't know how we should act. And so ignorance is the real issue. Well, if we're ignorant, then what we do need to understand is that we need to be in control of our senses. If we really understood life as it really is, as the Buddha is explaining, then we would understand that it's not, I can't help myself. The devil made me do it. I just couldn't resist the temptation. You can just as easily resist the temptation as these dogs are resisting those treats in front of them. You see how close those treats are to those dogs' mouths and noses? Those dogs have been trained to obey the dog handler, the master. So they'll sit there for hours with those treats. They can smell those treats, and they'll sit there for hours not eating those treats until the master says it's time to do that. And that's what the Buddha is asking for here. He said, look, you need to understand that your body and your senses do not control you. You can be their master. You need to stop letting the tail wag the dog, so to speak. And finally, right concentration. Here what we're saying is we cultivate states of blissful inner peace by using various yoga techniques. Okay, the yoga practices. Remember that yoga is whatever discipline you use to make progress spiritually. In the case of Hinduism, it's using particular body postures like this or hatha yoga. And not every person who practices hatha yoga, by the way, looks like this. But it's the same type of disciplined idea that you were using these poses, these bodily poses, to make progress spiritually.